John McMullen from 97.3 ESPN.com. He also covers the league nationally, writes a national column for FanRag Sports NFL, and he joins us now on the Sports Bash. And I want to dive into this that just came out, John, that owners from the Patriots, Browns, Steelers, Dolphins, Jaguars, and Eagles, that would be Jeffrey Lurie, all met with Roger Goodell over the anthem protests. Any insight or intuition what maybe they're trying to accomplish here?
I don't think they know what to do, to be honest. And that's what they came out of the meeting was there wasn't going to be any league-wide advisement for particular teams, and they were going to leave it up to each individual organization as to how they plan to move forward. And that basically kind of tells you they're like, we don't know what to do either, because, hey, let's be honest, they're in a no-win situation. No matter what they do, they're going to alienate some people. So it's frustrating. I talked to people behind the scenes in the league. They think it's unfair that they've been put in this position. They're probably right. But unfortunately, that's where we are in our society today.
Yeah, and the statement from the Broncos earlier today that said that they will stand together the rest of the season. So you're starting to see teams kind of pivot or reverse or maybe try to do something different than what we saw on this past Sunday, right?
Yeah, and I think it's, I think they would be best served, each team would be saying, look, we prefer that you stand, but if we don't, you understand, and we understand and leave it at that. I think that's the best path forward. I think the majority, remember, before the president spoke and said what he said, less than 1% of the players in this league were protesting the national anthem. And while it was made to be a big deal, it really wasn't. If you look at it from that standpoint and understand of the nearly 1,700 players in this league, very, very few were doing anything of that nature. So while you had a vocal minority saying they were going to turn off the TV if Colin Kaepernick or Malcolm Jenkins or anybody else did this type of thing, the reality was it wasn't that big of an issue. And now it's morphed into this giant story that transcends sports in general and is really on CNN and Fox News.
That's right. Yeah, I watched the roundtable last night with a lot of the NFL players on CNN, and it was very interesting to hear their sides and points and what they are trying to the messages that they are trying to get out there that keep getting kind of squelched by the fact that people keep calling them anthem protests, and they're trying to explain that that's not what they're protesting.
Yeah, and again, I think it depends on the individual. I think if you talk about Malcolm Jenkins or somebody of that nature, that's certainly true. Malcolm's been very consistent. If you talk about Colin Kaepernick, who has been the most publicized, obviously, there's been some hypocrisy on both sides in that count. Because if you go all the way back to Colin Kaepernick's first statement, it was basically, I'm not going to stand for that flag. It was basically disrespecting the flag, and I think a lot of people have forgotten that. And then you had the socks where he wore in pregame warm-ups that insulted the police across the country. So there was much more controversy as far as, and this is the second straight day I'm knocked down by an ambulance, but there's certainly a lot of controversy from his standpoint. So I think if you look at the individual players, it's different. But people have sort of glommed everybody into one case, and I don't think that's fair either.
All right, let's get into some football here. Sunday is a interesting week for the Eagles. We talked a little bit about it yesterday, John. The percentages, if you're 3-1 as opposed to 2-2 at making the playoffs. You wrote a piece at 97.3 ESPN.com about the Chargers presenting a problem for the Eagles in their pass rush. Peters and Johnson against Bosa, and obviously the AFC Defensive Player of the Month, right, is Melvin Ingram. So this should be really the matchup to watch on Sunday.
Yeah, it should, and you can imagine how good you have to be playing to be AFC Defensive Player of the Month, and your team is 0-3, which kind of tells you how well Melvin Ingram has played. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the AFC West in general, that's where pass rushers go to flourish. I mean, it just seems they're all over. Kansas City with Justin Houston and Dee Ford and Tom Ali, and then you have Khalil Mack and you have Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram. They're just all over in that division. And this is difficult. But as Lane Johnson pointed out this week, it's been tough for him. It's been Ryan Kerrigan, Justin Houston, Jason Pierre-Paul, and now Joey Bosa, who will be lined up on his side most of the time. It's been tough for him. And, hey, the Eagles, as I wrote at 973ESPN.com, the Eagles are more well-equipped to handle it than most teams because they have two very good tackles, and they've both been playing well, in Jason Peters and Lane Johnson.
They sure have. And last week, I think I saw, according to Pro Football Focus, those two tackles were the only two tackles as a team that didn't give up any hits to the quarterback last week, and that's going up against a very good Giants pass rush.
Yeah, a very good one with Olivier Vernon on the other side of JPP. And, yeah, I mean, the offensive line as a whole was off the charts when Wisniewski was in at left guard. I mean, Kelsey had one of his best games in years. I mean, he was dominant. And as you mentioned, the tackles, the performance they had, and Brandon Brooks, more often than not, is just rock solid at right guard. So that was kind of the offensive line Pro Football Focus kind of predicted back in the offseason when they said the Eagles had the top offensive line in football. That was what we expected to see, and you finally saw it against the Giants.
John, you just mentioned Wiz. Will he be in there as the starter on Sunday at the left guard position?
I think so. Obviously, the Eagles are not going to confirm that as they didn't last week when they were making the change from Chance Warmack, from Isaac Seumalo to Chance Warmack. But if you look at the things, if you look at the little things, as I mentioned yesterday, Kelsey was back at practice today, and he had a little bit of a sore knee. Was given a Veterans Day yesterday. So Wisniewski was playing center. But if you looked at the individual drills, he was working with the first team, meaning Jason Peters, in the combo block period, where the left guard works with the left tackle and the right guard works with the right tackle. So that gives you a clear indication that the Eagles are leaning toward him this week. It's not 100%, but it just makes sense. I mean, he completely outplayed Chance Warmack last week, so there's no reason to go back to Chance, and Isaac Seumalo is basically out of the conversation for now.
You know, Jason Kelsey, John's been a whipping boy the last few years, but then he was one of the top-rated centers last week by Pro Football Focus.
I think he was number one.
Played much better, in your opinion, John, Jason Kelsey?
Oh, yeah, he was dominant. There was the one block where he got two guys, and that was old-school Jason Kelsey when he was, you know, he's been a Pro Bowler the last 2 years, but people would argue that was due to reputation. And he hasn't been nearly the same player the last couple seasons. But if you go back before that, when he was one of the top centers in football, that's the guy you saw against the Giants. Now, we'll see if he can do that consistently from week to week. But last week is as good as it gets. If you were complaining about Jason Kelsey last week, you just don't understand offensive line play.
And as a whole, I mean, Peters last week was the third highest graded tackle in the league. Kelsey, at center. It seems that the line is starting to come together. It got off to a slow start. We saw them run the ball really well last week. If they can get a left guard in there constantly instead of rotating them around, that should really solidify and hopefully turn this into a much stronger suit than it's been through the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I don't think really it was struggling as a whole. It was one position that was struggling and sort of dragging everyone down.
Yeah.
That's not to say they didn't play better last week against the Giants, specifically Kelsey being the one. But the other three, Jason Peters, Lane Johnson, Brandon Brooks, they've been pretty consistent throughout the season and pretty solid in each and every game. But when you have your left guard giving up 4 sacks and 5 pressures in a particular game, well, that's gonna bring your stats down as a group. And the Eagles are still at the bottom of the league when it comes to allowing sacks. But that's due to one position, and also the fact that Carson Wentz likes to extend plays. So he's susceptible to being sacked more because he's always trying to extend plays and try to make something happen, as opposed to, say, Eli Manning, who you saw last week, is just going to get rid of the football.
Yeah, and this week they'll face a great pass rush. The Eagles will, of course. We'll see how their line holds up against Bosa. This is a 3-4 look from the Chargers. They got the Leo with Ingram there, so they got a really good defense here. But they can be beat, right? I mean, their secondary is where they really struggle, and this is a spot, too, for the Eagles that they should be able to get some shots down the field. But this hasn't been a strength of Carson Wentz.
Yeah, real quick, I mean, the Chargers basically, Gus Bradley's the defensive coordinator, so it's more of really a 4-3 look, but they have those goofy names with Leo and Otto, which is really Leo's just a weak side pass rusher. Otto's a 3-technique defensive tackle. So it's basically the Seattle defense and what Dan Quinn does in Atlanta. So you're going to see a lot of cover 3, and you're going to see they want to get pressure up front, a lot like Jim Schwartz wants to do here, and they have the guys to do it. But on the back end, Jason Verrett's gone again. He's the best corner. If you go back 2 years, he was one of the best corners in football, but he's been just stricken by injury since. So that's a big deal for them. And so Carson will have an opportunity, I think, at times. But you do have to center on that, obviously, the biggest matchup, I think, in this game, and that's the fact that you got to block Ingram and Bosa, and that's easier said than done. And Bosa specifically, he's a lot like Brandon Graham, except he might be more impressive physically. He just never stops. I mean, his motor is always going, and he's not going to be outworked by anybody on the field.
And I'm a little surprised. I thought he'd be a bust. I really thought he was going to be one of those guys, big name, big college, came in and just didn't have it. But he's proven me wrong on that because he's pretty darn good, man. That Bosa, as you said, he's all over the place, and it's because he constantly comes at you.
Yeah, he really does. And that's what makes, as I said, Brandon here so difficult. Because even, you might get them on one play, but they're just guys who are going to keep going and keep going and keep going. And they have the conditioning down. And as I said, they're going to outwork you, and they're never going to stop. And that's difficult if you're an offensive lineman in this league, because let's be honest, usually you can take a play off or two and sort of catch your breath, because most guys don't go as hard as players like Bosa and Graham. But in this case, he's not going to stop.
Hey, John, speaking of the Eagles' defensive line now, all signs point toward Fletcher Cox being out for this contest. How would the Eagles, in your mind, cover for the loss of Fletcher Cox? How do they overcome? He obviously missed portions of the Giants game, but if he has to miss this game, how do they overcome that loss?
Yeah, it's going to be Bo Allen, so obviously it's a big loss. I mean, there's no way you can replace a player like Fletcher Cox and the impact he provides for that defense. And he's definitely going to be out for this game. He'll be ruled out tomorrow, I would imagine. I've heard 2 weeks is probably, perhaps 3 if they're very, very cautious. with the calf injury. And it's going to be, remember, Destiny Vallejo's still out with the wrist injury as well. So that means it's going to be Bo Allen. As it was last week, Bo played 50 snaps and did pretty well, acquitted himself. But his strength is obviously defending the run. And Fletcher Cox is dominant in both phases, and he gets a tremendous interior push, and the Eagles are just not going to have that, so it's going to make it much more difficult for them.
So do you think we'll see some more of Curry and Graham? Do you think you'll see them maybe play defensive tackle?
Yeah, I mean, they use that sort of NASCAR package, they call it, when they try to get 4 rushers on the field at once, and they've sort of thrown Brandon or Vinny in the past inside at times, and you can bring in obviously Chris Long or Derek Barnett on the outside, depending on what you want to do. So you'll see that, sure. I mean, if they're in 3rd and long, one of those guys to get an extra pass rusher on the field, and maybe, the great preseason Derek Barnett has had really hasn't panned out early. Maybe he can get himself going in nickel situations on the pass rush because they are going to need some help because Fletcher's awfully consistent, and that's just a difficult player to replace.
Yeah, it is. And you wonder what the trickle-down effect is for the other guys, Jernigan, Graham, those 2 guys specifically, what he allows those 2 guys to do and not having him out there, what that means for other teams and their blocking schemes against Jernigan and Graham.
Well, yeah, I mean, Tim has played very well this season, Tim Jernigan, and I thought he would be a great fit for this defense. He's turning out to be a great fit. But now all of a sudden, one of the reasons he was a great fit is because he's a tremendous athlete. He's a good interior pass rusher. And you can't pay that much attention to him because you got to pay attention to Fletcher Cox. He's an all-pro level player. Well, now he's not there, so you can pay more attention to Tim Jernigan. And as I said, Bo Allen or Elijah Qualls, they're probably not going to do much on the pass rush. So you're going to have to get that from other avenues, whether it is moving certain guys inside. But you can't do that too much. You got to be careful because obviously you can't have Vinny Curry inside or Brandon Graham inside on base downs because then Melvin Gordon will kill you running the football. So you have to be very judicious with it. And Jim Schwartz understands that, and that's why Bo Allen got 50 reps last week after Fletcher went down.
Yeah, we were talking at the beginning of the show, John. They got Gordon. Very good running back. They've got Allen, Keenan Allen, very steady. They've got Benjamin. He's been a big play guy. They have Gates, very steady there, obviously. Rivers is the guy that really cost them last week. Of all the guys on their offense, you would say Rivers is the guy you count on. But Rivers was the one guy who you can essentially say cost them last week. So of the offensive weapons against the Eagles' defense as is, who worries you the most?
Well, I think if you look at it, I think Gordon worries you the most on that team now because that's when he's healthy. And he's been dealing with a knee, but Anthony Lynn said he's going to play. He's one of the top backs in this league. Gates is a Hall of Fame tight end, but he's had his better days. He's obviously aging. And Keenan Allen's a great receiver, but he's had so many injury problems. And it's not like the Giants where you have other guys besides Odell Beckham as well that are going to scare you as much. So I think the Eagles could do more double teaming on Keenan Allen this week, and they certainly should because they're still banged up in the secondary. But all that said, I mean, Phillip Rivers is still a borderline Hall of Fame quarterback. And, yeah, he's got a lot of Brett Favre in him. He always has. He's a gunslinger. He'll take chances. And occasionally he will hurt you with an interception because he thinks he can get the ball in the windows that are probably, not a lot of guys can get him into that window. But if he gets hot, he's one of those guys that can put up 350 in the blink of an eye. So I still think it's, when you're playing Phillip Rivers, you always got to be concerned.
Got a big week 4 coming up here. Quarter poll of the season for all the Eagles coverage from John McMullen. Go to 97.3ESPN.com. And for the national column, check out FanRag Sports or follow John on Twitter at JFMcMullen. You can get him there. And, of course, the Thursday night game tonight, we've got Packers and Bears. John, I don't know that there's a more outrageous stat than the fact that these two teams are exactly tied and almost have the exactly tie score.
Yeah, and remember, it's the oldest rivalry in the NFL as well. So you got to go back to 1933, I believe, since the Packers have had the advantage in this series, because the Bears dominated so much from that period in between Bart Starr and Brett Favre, which is a very long time in Green Bay. But ever since then, the Packers have completely dominated, and the Packers will be in the lead in that series tonight. There's no question about it. The way the Bears beat the Packers.
Hey, by the way, check out John's piece on Jalen Mills right now at 97.3ESPN.com. We'll talk more about Mills and the secondary tomorrow. John's pick for the Eagles and Chargers is posted right now on our website, 97.3ESPN.com. All right, John, we'll talk tomorrow, pal.
All right, thank you, guys.